We are seeing a manager crisis. Manager engagement fell from 30% to 27% globally. Meanwhile, employees, there is a slight uptick happening. What we're seeing is the manager, so that level is feeling lonelier, is feeling less engaged, is feeling more isolated, and we have not seen that decline since the pandemic, since we went into lockdown. The people who have the most empathy and lead with the most empathy are the ones who are able to hold people the most accountable. And so I think that empathy, the underlying values are accountability and compassion.
If we're going to build healthier workplaces, we have to treat culture like more than just a buzzword. Today on Helion Insights, I'm joined by Dr. Katie Gaebel, co-founder at Iconoclast Advisors, leadership strategies, and someone who's been quietly rethinking how systems, strategy, and emotional intelligence collide inside the workplace. Katie's background spans higher education, executive leadership, and culture transformation, and her perspective is very clear. Workplace culture is a human science. It's not just about programs or perks, but about how people feel, how leaders show up, and how we design work that actually works for people. In this conversation, we're stripping it down to the basics. What is culture really? What are we getting wrong about engagement and leadership? And what happens when we bring more emotional awareness into systems that weren't built for it? So let's get into it. You've spent years thinking about workplace culture, but I want to start here and again, just if you can simplify this as much as possible, that'll be great. What exactly does a healthy workplace looks like in your own experience?
Yeah. So in my own experience, the first thing that comes to my mind is that a workplace that's healthy is made up of individuals that are always evolving. We're always bringing in new information, working with it, and creating outputs. So a healthy workplace needs to be a container for that to happen, for innovation to happen, for failure to happen, for processing to happen. So a healthy workplace enables people to sit with something, to process through something, to gather information from other people, and to create a decision based on what they bring in, and allow for failure to happen without judgment, but really leaning in with curiosity. So the short answer, and I know this is an answer that a lot of people are probably giving today, is psychological safety. And psychological safety is really the idea that not that everyone has to agree with everyone at all times,
right,
but that the environment has to be safe enough for people to voice dissent, and for that dissent to be heard and understood and distilled through the entire environment.
Right. And when you say a container, especially, talking about psychological safety,
Yes.
How exactly does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from a psychological perspective, a container is, if you think about, you visualize a container, it's something that can hold something. So it is an environment that's co-created. So that's the other piece of healthy environments. We are constantly co-constructing and co-creating the workplace.
Right.
And this container is really co-created by teams, by leaders, by employees. And it's really, do I feel held? Do I feel safe? Can I put this somewhere and have it be contained? Can I share my feelings without judgment, without fear of being fired, or without fear of my manager thinking less of me because I have feelings of trepidation about a project, or something didn't go well and I need to express that. So a container in any relationship is really what is held between two people or between a team or within a team, and how is everyone actively contributing to that container.
Right. And like, so when it comes to like hierarchy of like leadership,
Yeah.
how does the container looks like? Because, you kind of touched on, people being afraid of, being let go, fired, and they don't have that safety. But when it comes to the hierarchy of leadership, I noticed that there's a huge, breach, and it's a very bad breach between executive managers and the rest of the team. Yeah. There's always this massive gap between those two areas because the managers, they have to go up and communicate, and then also go to the people, the employees, and communicate. But somewhere, the executive teams, they just hear complain, and they don't see it as like, the manager needs your feedback, and so that we can all coexist. To your point, the containers are safe for everyone to be able to say what they have in mind and then be heard. But like, how does it look like in let's say, for example, in a healthy organization and a not so healthy organization?
I'm going to maybe widen the lens a little bit and talk about some Gallup research that just came out. The State of the Global Workplace was just released.
Oh, yeah, actually
maybe
read that,
2 or 3 weeks ago. And we are seeing a manager crisis. And I think this applies to your question, and I'll kind of circle back around to your question in a second. Manager engagement fell from 30% to 27% globally. Wow. And we have not seen that decline since the pandemic, since we went into lockdown. Jesus. So there's something happening with managers. Right. And meanwhile, employees, there's a slight uptick happening with employees. And but what we're seeing is that the manager, so that level, is feeling lonelier, is feeling less engaged, is feeling more isolated than we've ever seen before.
Jeez.
And so that is the level, to what you were saying, they have to take strategy and vision from leadership and distill it, and then talk to their employees about how to execute on that strategy and that vision. And meanwhile, the employees are the ones who are on the ground doing the work, saying, okay, this is great in theory, but in action, this isn't working, or this is a problem. Right. And the managers are constantly they're translating between two different worlds, the world of the worker and the world of leadership. And so they have to wear even more hats and have skill sets that are even more refined around communication and around conflict resolution and mitigating some of these issues before they start. Right. And managers are not being trained to do that. They're not being set up for success in a lot of ways. So typically our managers become managers because they do really well at their one job. Oh, you did great. Let's promote you to manager. Yeah. Without any training, without any really conversation sometimes of, do you want to be? Do you want to be a people manager? And what that means for them, having to let go of some of their work that they were so good at, and then taking on the people management aspect, which can be emotionally and psychologically very damaging for people who aren't prepared for that. Right. Because all of a sudden they're exposed to confidential information. They have to manage conflict between people without any training. And so we see managers feeling like they have to navigate this space themselves. Right. So to go back to your question, I believe that the culture is always set at the top of the organization. And it is set not just through words, but through behaviors. We see vision statements and mission statements posted in boardrooms and on websites. Those can just gather dust because most organizations, and Brene Brown has done a lot of research on this, and she said that 10% of companies have actually operationalized their values, only 10%.
Right.
And yet every company has values written somewhere, mission statement written somewhere. But to operationalize them in a healthy culture, that means not just, oh, well, we want it to look like this. We want people to be nice to each other. We want people to be transparent. We want to have open communication and feedback. It is the recognition of what it takes to go from actual to aspirational. What is that gap? And how does leadership help address that gap?
Right.
And that is where the container begins to be created. When leadership can say, look, we haven't done things right in the past, and we're here to fix it.
Right.
That is step one in creating that container.
Right. Well, it's I mean, I like hear you say that, but then when I, like work with, like individuals, like companies, and then one of the things that I noticed, and to your point with the Gallup, like study, I actually talked about how 70% of employee engagement is solely determined by the managers.
Yeah.
And that's a huge number. When now to the stat that you mentioned, it's dropping from 30% to 27%,
yeah,
which is insane.
Yep.
And like, meaning the managers are, they're just health within the workplace is declining, but the output is like increasing.
Absolutely.
Like, the executives are expecting them to do more.
That's right.
Because whatever their goal is, maybe they want to sit on the yacht and let the managers build the company. but like, I actually saw this trend on like LinkedIn where, it's called like the accidental boss, where people that one day open their computer and everybody's emailing them, and meaning they're graduating to becoming a manager without the communication, without the expectation. But now everybody's seeking their help because they excel at what they do. They're very effective. But now they're feeling the burnout. They're like, okay, this is too much. I'm not being paid for it. I'm not sign up for it. But maybe they're like people pleasers, and they're like, they don't know how to,
That's right.
Speak for themselves. But they just slowly become that manager without the raise, without the title.
Yep.
But you being a chief, people officer, how can someone, communicate effectively if they find themselves in that position? And I asked this specifically because I made a TikTok video telling people, hey, I'm going to do this. Do you guys have any questions? And I had some questions about that.
I mean, I am a firm believer in working from ego to eco, which means I have to understand my role.
Right.
And what I'm co-creating. You mentioned sometimes people are people pleasers.
Right.
I also have to understand what identities I'm carrying into the workplace that could be a potential contributing factor to that. Some of those, like being a people pleaser, I can work on. I can manage some of those things by setting healthy boundaries and not getting upset when people have emotional reactions to my healthy professional boundaries. Some of those pieces of identity I can't do anything about. Women tend to carry the burden of administrative tasks in the workplace.
Right.
They tend to be the ones who have to do party planning, have to do administrative tasks in meetings. They tend to be the one called out to take notes. That happens, and recognizing that in our culture is really important. I think for people pleasers, that can give us an opportunity. If I'm a manager and I know I'm leading a team where maybe it's mostly women and two men, we're all going to take turns taking notes. We're going to sign up for it. Everyone's going to take turn making the agenda, leading the agenda, and then taking notes and sharing those notes after the meeting. Right. And I can talk about that because, one, that gives everyone practice that they need in effective meetings and how to create and report out. But two, the burden of the administrative task isn't carried by a single person. Right. If I'm someone who finds myself in kind of a de facto manager position, I'm going to be asking myself some questions of how did I get here? And that's where I'm going to start. And then what is happening under the surface with the employees who are coming to me? I have had many experiences in the workplace where, in the absence of good mentorship and leadership, employees seek that out from people that exhibit certain traits and skills that they actually want to have themselves. And that can put an overburden on someone when all of a sudden they become a mentor or a coach or a manager to someone that they weren't expecting. But really asking the questions of those people who have created you as a de facto manager or boss. Hey, what are you looking for in this workplace relationship? What are some skill sets that you see in me that maybe I can help cultivate in you?
Right.
And how can we work towards that?
Yeah, and you know, as you speak, you know, it just took me back to my first company, which was a media company. I like founded a company with no intention of it becoming what it became.
Yeah.
And I was very young back then. And very quickly, we had a team of, I think, 64 or something. I forgot how many people. Also tells you what kind of a boss I was. I can't even remember the head count. But yeah, so I had no intention of running the company. And I remember back then, my number two, Louis, he's very phenomenal, but very cunning. And I knew this from the beginning.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I find those traits because I had them do like a Colby test and he gave me like the assessment. And this was my way of trying to just be a good boss. But then I realized quickly that as the leader, I was a people pleaser myself. When they can't come to me with a great idea, even though I know that doesn't align with the company, I just keep quiet and then let them do what they're doing. But then I'll get angry internally because I'm just like, if they only know, but I'm not communicating. Do you see that happening in bigger companies where, like leaders or like executive teams, they have an idea of what the vision, the company should go, but the managers are coming with their own original ideas and they're not speaking up at the executive level. And now there's that mismatch in like ideas and communication, and which is creating tension where management teams and the executive teams are just getting wider when it comes to communication.
Yeah, I have so many things that are coming to my mind. There's this concept of like true community, and I'd have to look up the researcher, but there are phases of workplace community. And what you're talking about is what he referred to as pseudo community, where we have this kind of veneer of civility. Oh, I love it. Thank you for bringing this to me. I'm going to consider this. And inside you're like,
what the hell is this?
Yeah. Why are they working on this? Why aren't they working on? I know that.
This is what we need to do.
Yeah.
But not everybody's doing something else.
That's right. And rather than asking those questions of, first of all, as a manager, where did I go wrong in communicating my expectations? Because every relationship is co-created, and I have to recognize my role in that situation, but also not asking, like, I'm curious, tell me more about how you got to this work and how this other work is being balanced while you're, focused on what clearly is a passion for you. Pseudo communities on the surface are sugar coated. I mean, it's like the candy coating, but underneath it is nothing but the meeting after the meeting where people want to have conversations about, how dare they? Did you hear what they said? Did you see what they did? There is no true community. And only working past the pseudo community by going into rumbling, I guess is what Brene Brown would call it, or there's the storming phase when you are team building. You have to go through conflict to understand this is how we talk about things. These are our shared expectations and shared values. And then you come out on the other side as a team, having worked through that, truly forming as a team. But I also think that in those situations, managers are playing a role, again, to go back to your question of like, is it the easier path for them to just be like, oh yeah, I'll bring this to leadership?
Right.
Because are they lacking training in how to manage that conversation? Have they never been able to have that conversation with their manager, who's likely a member of leadership? And so looking at like, what are the root causes that happen and occur in a situation like that? That's where I always want to go, is that there's always the behavior, and then there are the root causes that underlie someone's behavior.
Right. So let's try to identify, let's say, a root cause of the behavior. And you being a chief people officer, I'm sure you've seen that just in your experience in the past. Like, what would you identify as being a root cause when it comes to communication, especially on a like the manager side, and also because I know most team members. And this is my horrible boss belief, is that sometimes people come to work, they just come to work because they just want to go to work and not have to be part of that community that companies are trying to create so hard, which is something that I've experienced myself. And again, to your point, I had to look in and realize that I wasn't creating that safe space for them to feel like they have to be part of the community. And I keep hearing them saying, hey, I'm just here to work. And I don't like that. And this was like 4 years ago. This is crazy Abraham back in the day. But how do you identify the root causes? Let's say if you're consulting me back then and be like, Abraham, you have these people saying this, and you have your management team that you want them to be more involved. But you yourself, now I'm self-consulting myself.
Yeah. I mean,
I guess
do
therapy
the work
works.
for me.
Therapy works, guys. But in your own, experience as someone who is in the HR space, you've been in the people space, and you've worked with really big companies and be able to identify different individuals. How does that look like?
So if this were Abraham of years past, my first question to Abraham would be, tell me about your hiring process. And
that was not a hiring process. I guess that's where I make the mistake, I guess.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is...
Actually, my hiring process was a podcast. I'll invite people in, and we will just do a podcast.
And then you got excited
and then I
about
got
their
excited
enthusiasm,
it's a
about their passion. So what the misalignment is that I'm hearing is you stepped into the world of work with the assumption that folks all hold this commonality that work should be a place of community. Not everyone believes that. I
was very disappointed when I hired some people and I was doing all this cool stuff.
And
half
that's
of
a
them were not
value.
interested.
That can be an organizational value. And what we get wrong all the time in companies is that we don't hire for a values fit. And a lot of people talk about culture fit. I want to blow that out of the water, because a values fit means our culture is going to shift over time. As we bring in new people, the culture is going to change. As our work shifts, as things innovate, our culture will shift along with it. But our values are the thing that keep us grounded and keeps people engaged. If my why connects to your why, I'm with you all day, any day. I got your back. I know you got my back. But if our values are misaligned, no amount of like, hey come be part of the community. And the other
sounds like a cult the way that I'm describing.
And the other part of that question, the way that you phrased it was, you wanted them to take part in the community, not co-create the community.
So I had a cult.
Here's my community. It already exists. Come be part of it. Not, hey, help make this different and better. I value you.
Yeah.
Change our community. I want you to contribute to the growth of this community.
Yeah, so by doing that, I'm actually empowering them to want to be a part of it instead of trying to tell them, you should be part of this because Abraham has the coolest community. Right. And I mean, facts. You probably do have the coolest community. I know I do, but I guess that's an ego thing. And this is Abraham back then. Okay, I don't do this now. Now, when I have meetings, one-on-ones, which I have more often now, I try to make sure that I don't speak first. I want to get their own perspective. What exactly do they understand at the task? And even after I'm done talking to them, I want them to tell me, like, is there anything that I say that doesn't make sense at all? Because sometimes I do be yapping a lot, and I get excited because I love what I do, and you know, so I try not to put them on them. I want them to feel like, hey, even if you don't enjoy this and you're just here just to do work, I'm totally fine with that. But back then I was like, you have to care because mental health matters.
That's right.
I'm saving the world.
And that is a value that you held. That is a value of your company.
Right.
And so, yes, screening, you know, as your consultant of years past, I would say screening for that is really, really critical.
Right.
And it's where I think a lot of companies miss the mark entirely because they don't even know their own values.
Right. Yeah. I mean, where were you this whole time, man?
Dang it.
I could have had
rewind.
I could have kept that company going. Coulda, woulda, shoulda, right?
And I love that you're having one-on-ones with your employees today. That is such a critical component, and you're letting them start those conversations. Doing things like asking questions of what's one skill or passion or competency that you feel I've overlooked, and how can I do better? A question like that is safe. It gives them space to say, you know, actually, Abraham, like, I am really getting passionate about photography. I've been doing this in my free time. I don't know how it fits in here at work, but it's something like I've been exploring. All of a sudden, they are feeling safe to share information with you. And it disarms people. It will never completely remove the power dynamic of manager to employee. But what it does is level that playing field a little bit more and say, it's safe here. We're contained to talk about things that I may have been missing. And I want you to share those with me because they matter.
I like that. And you know, I just said that just a few days ago, you know, like one of my team members actually came to the office. And then, you know, she just sat with me and was like, hey, I just want to share, you know, why last week, you know, I wasn't producing enough. And then she shared what, you know, some things that I didn't know about, which was very powerful. And I was like, whoa, well, thank you. Because I started a meeting with like, hey, you know, last week was kind of, you know, like different from, you know, the way you just do work. And I want to know, like, is everything okay? And I just asked her that. That's why now my business card even has like, how's your spirit? Because I always try to remind myself to lead with that. And then I just asked her, I'm just like, you don't, you know, and then this is something that happened once. And now she would come to me and just like, let me know whenever she's not feeling, you know, feeling some type of way. And this is something that I want to continue as a company, especially a culture. Since you have to blow that out of the water, but but to your point, it's like basically like leading with values, and then establishing the culture with them involved.
That's right.
That's very, very powerful. Yeah. What exactly is a company culture, or just culture as a whole, and then the value? Because I know companies have mission, value, and all this, you know, like fluffy words.
So values I describe as the non-negotiables that guide your decision making. We have them, even if we can't name them. You know, if you're faced with a hard problem in your own life, you lean on those values, whether or not you know it, to guide that decision making. Integrity is my top value, hands down. It has led me to make very difficult decisions, but ones I will never regret. They've been painful in the moment because that has meant leaving jobs sometimes. But I would rather do that than compromise my values. And integrity means choosing to do the thing that's hard. And the thing that's right sometimes. So I would say values is the non-negotiables that guides your decision making as an organization. If you were to ask a company, what do you use to guide your decision making, and then hold that against what values they have written down, I would say most companies are not aligned.
Yeah, absolutely.
In their decision making versus the cool words that they have written down.
Yeah, I mean, as founders, we're so good at creating cool, fluffy, fancy words. but then we write something totally different,
Yeah.
which I've unfortunately fell into that category of founders. But now my value is just leading with empathy. That's why even my title now, Chief Empathy Officer, is just a constant reminder for myself. And when I say empathy, I'm not talking about there's structure around that empathy.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when people hear empathy, they completely have their own perspective as to what empathy is.
Yeah.
But for me, within the company, empathy basically means that just being there for the next person, the people that you work with. That's a customer, that's a client. Make sure that we lead with empathy as we communicate, as we help them, as we navigate, whatever, maybe, like in front of us, and to make sure that we're aligned with that, vision. So is that what you would call a vision?
Yeah, and I would, if I were consulting you, little free consulting here.
Free consulting.
I would ask you, what are the building blocks of empathy for you? How do you get to empathy?
That's a good question. So for me personally, because again, I'm trying to make sure that I don't project everything to people that I work with. That's why I say leading with empathy, because they could be leading with empathy completely different. But for me personally, which I hope will be, trickle down to everyone else that I work with, is understanding yourself first, knowing, that's why now I still do the Colby test, even for myself. I do it very frequently in people that I work with, because I want them to understand how do you work with other people? Because if you understand yourself first, you are more likely to have empathy with outcomes in the workplace, and this can go even after the workplace. Because empathy doesn't just end at 5 p.m.
Right.
It goes throughout the rest of the day, your family, your kids. And so to me, the building blocks would be, for me personally, is just understanding myself, understanding who I am, how do I communicate, how do I make sure the people that I work with clearly understand, understand what I'm trying to say, understand not only my intention as the founder, but my heart as to why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I guess that's the building blocks. Is that something that fits that category, or am I missing something?
Yeah, no, I think, again, as a consultant, my role would be to help you operationalize those things so that when you're looking at hiring, when you're looking at performance reviews, when you're looking at even crafting job descriptions, and your brand identity. You talk about things like empathy means understanding myself, so I understand others. Empathy means communicating, clear
motivation. I forgot the final word, capacity.
Yeah, and all of those things, I think, are necessary ingredients. So also looking at, by building blocks, I would say, okay, emotional intelligence. When you look at someone in your company or a prospective hire, how are you understanding their emotional intelligence? How are you training or teaching emotional intelligence? When you talk about empathetic communication, how is that taught? How are you cultivating that? And those would be things that I would say you could operationalize.
Right.
We do X number of trainings as a team, or I require my individual employees to do X number of activities related to emotional intelligence, whatever that is. All of that feeds up into empathy. And then I absolutely agree. A lot of people believe that if you lead with empathy, you're somehow soft. But I actually would say the people who have the most empathy and lead with the most empathy are the ones who are able to hold people the most accountable. And so I think that empathy, the underlying values are accountability and compassion. Because it's ultimately releasing our own ego. Because when we don't want to have difficult conversations, that's our ego that's leading. A difficult conversation usually is one that's compassionate. It means that I have to share something with you that is critical to your growth and development, but might be hard for you to receive.
Indeed.
And so I have to release my ego in that and know I might not get it right the first time. It might be messy. This work is always really messy. But I am called, and my responsibility is to hold my employees accountable.
I love that. And I just say that I actually just had I believe it was last week, I had an employee who, like came to office and she just had like a lot of like fire. I can tell that there's a lot happening in her life, and that was spewing into the workplace. And me back then, I would have shut off. Like the moment the energy come to me, I'd be like, whoa, and I would just not say anything. And I would just slowly check off this individual. I'm planning on letting them go.
Okay.
Yeah, literally, my mind, that's how I operated. But then I noticed, somehow when she came, I actually, took, told her, hey, let's just sit down and talk. And I'm just like, I cannot have you talk to me this way. It's not okay. But I'm here to listen to you. What is going on? And then she actually opened up and shared what actually was happening, which was she sent an email. I didn't see it. And she needed my response. And she has a title of a partner. And she felt like she wasn't being respected. She needed me to give her. I was like, oh, I didn't even see your email. And I was like, hold on, let me just go look. I went to my email, never saw it. She looked to realize she sent it to my agency email, which I don't ever look at because I've known her for so long. That's the email she has. And I've switched email. And I'm just like, well, I apologize. Again, this is the right email. Make sure you always use this. And then I take the initiative to actually contact the client and be like, hey, I apologize. This is on me. But back then I would have just shut off because I would find that as being disrespectful. And I would not deal with it. And the reason why I brought this up is because back then 80% of my team were all women. And, they were like the most talented people I've had on my team too. So I just had so much expectation because I know they would just get shit done. And I'm just like, they would get shit done. But then I had one of my employees told me that, Abraham, you know what? I think you would, therapy will be a good option for you because it will help you communicate effectively. We keep saying what we want, but you are not listening. But to me, I felt like I was a great listener. But
That's powerful. That's powerful that they felt safe enough to share that with you. And then was that the impetus for you going to therapy?
That was the second reason. The first one was my ex telling me that you need to go to therapy. And then the employee said that I was like, you know what? This is twice someone is telling me I need to go to therapy for my communication. Because back then I had a stutter, so I hated to talk. I hated to deal with people. And it was a huge insecurity of mine where like stuttering was like, I don't enjoy it. And so I would rather just keep what I have to say to myself and just shake my head and move on. So that's why now I said I lead with empathy, but I make sure that I understand what's happening with me first. And understand myself before I can deal with other people. Because back then I didn't have any of those tools. That's why now I'm a huge advocate for therapy because look at me talking, okay?
It's
I had a
amazing. Well, and what I'm hearing is there was a sense of shame that was showing up for you in the workplace. And that was shutting you down and dimming your light. And so what a beautiful thing that therapy can do. And it's funny, I hear in a lot of workspaces, I've been in very male-dominated fields. I've been in workplaces that have been women-dominated. I always hear how it's, men aren't emotional. It's so much easier to work with men. And I would actually argue that men are emotional. They just show their emotions through things like aggression in the workplace. And because masculinity in the workplace is privileged and respected in a way that feminine emotion, and I'm going to use quotes around that, is not respected in the workplace. Things like yelling, saying inappropriate things to someone, I've been in workplaces where I've heard people ask people to step outside and settle things, and then they say that they're not emotional.
Wow.
And so when we talk about, again, a container,
I wish
that
we had a
culture,
camera. You should have seen my reaction to that. Let's step outside.
It's like high noon, Wild West kind of situation. Yeah.
Wow.
Like I challenge you to a duel.
A fist fight.
That is,
bless your heart.
That is
going
emotion.
into companies and trying to work in those spaces.
And I would say we have a choice. We talk about it or we act it out. Those are our two choices. And subconsciously, a lot of people choose, I'm going to swallow this down. I'm not going to bring this up. I'm not going to talk about it. It comes out. It leaks out in organizations, in shitty emails people send to people, in icing people out of meetings, in passive aggressive behavior, in outright aggression.
Right.
And when emotions aren't welcomed, when healthy emotional expressions aren't welcomed in the workplace, all we're left with is this repeating pattern of toxic masculine behavior in the workplace. And I've been doing some reading on white supremacy culture in the workspace, and there are some researchers who kind of have criteria of what does that look like? How is that defined? And it's things like decisions are made very quickly. No one is allowed to have emotions once a decision is made. Emotions aren't considered. Emotions aren't invalidated. And of course, that is the workplace of days gone by.
Right.
Like
move fast, break things.
Yeah, like and no room for failure.
Right.
You fail, you're out. And so the idea of learning from our mistakes, as kids, that's what we were taught. You fall off your bike. Of course, you're not going to get it right the first time. You get back on.
Right.
What did we learn? Okay, we have to hold the handlebars a little bit differently, or we have to move a little bit faster. It's trial and error. And yet we're not given that grace in the workspace. And I think grace is another value.
No, absolutely. I actually love the word grace. So, and there's a whole story around
word.
that. I knew someone whose middle name was Grace, and I would call her Grace instead of the middle name because it's just a beautiful word.
It is.
I guess a beautiful name.
And it evokes an energy.
Yeah.
Like an I'm safe.
Yeah, because I know the fact that it's like linked to like the angelic halo of grace, having grace for someone else. But like even to your point, one of the reasons why I started wearing a fedora is because I used to work at the company, that was like a contractor for like Marvel, and I was like their acting CMO, and I was in charge of so many different accounts. I had almost 50 plus different like paid media buyers that were working with me. And I noticed that, on the leadership team, I was the only Black person in there. And my voice, I would try, and again, I had a stutter. So I would write things so that people can hear me. So I started wearing a fedora so that I can stand out. Because I put it on and I show up and people are like, oh, hey, Abraham, what's up? And then now I have less pressure where I can even get my thoughts out. And then to your point, I'm not sure what the research was, but I can definitely like attest to that being a problem where sometimes when you happen to be a minority in a company, no matter how talented you are, it's really hard for that minor woman. It's really hard for that individual to speak up because you look around. All you see is people that are very comfortable. And you are like, it's so hard for me to get into this room, number one. And then you are telling yourself all these untrue things as to like, you have to be perfect. Yeah,
the imposter syndrome.
Exactly.
Yeah, and meanwhile, you're surrounded by a bunch of mediocre people.
Yeah, I was like, I literally changed the entire way that they do advertising. And I can say this because I was part of a team labeled as the conversion team. Our job was to make sure that we were selling stuff. We need to sell all of the backpacks. And the way that we go about it, we spend so much time like researching what the next generation is going to do. And we take that data and then turn it into a product. So we're selling a future product that hasn't even been the kids are growing up to it. So
Yeah.
that's why they grow up to 40 years old and they still like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I came up with the concept, and this is something that I've seen, so it's not like it's mine. But I told them like we should start doing assessments with parents and get as much information from these parents as possible. And when one of them was like, you can mix your picture and your partner's picture and see how your baby looks like.
I remember that.
So I don't know if you did that test. I apologize.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So whatever your baby looked like, then we would take that and then try to figure out in the next 10 years what group is going to be the dominant group. And we created a superhero based off of that individual. Or we bring in a superhero from the, like from the comic books and be like, okay, the next 10 years, there's going to be a lot of mixed people.
Right.
And let's make sure we bring a mixed Spider-Man into the picture.
Yep.
And that's why they keep testing these different variations because they're testing the market from all their data.
Right.
I hate that I was involved in that, but I was young, very talented, and I wanted to feel like I belong and feel like my voice mattered. So I was just throwing whatever stick to the wall. But then I struggled so much to get my voice heard because I was the only black guy. But I made sure that didn't stop me because I was like, I know my talents, even though I had to stutter. It's debilitating. I hate it. But I decided to wear a fedora. So in your experience, how do you see that in like, places that you've worked where you see someone obviously who is in a place of position where you're like, come on, man, why is this person here? But then you see someone who deserves that position. I guess deserve is a strong word. So no one is deserving of anything. We sometimes it's luck, honestly. But in your own line of work, how do you see that play out?
Yeah, so a few initial thoughts I want to get out. I think one thing is that I've done a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I've seen companies genuinely confused when they hire their first person of color and they don't stay, or their first engineer who's a woman and she doesn't stay. And, the question isn't what's the window dressing. The question is your house in order? Because if you bring in someone and you truly value their perspective, what they offer to your company, they're not just a token hire, which a lot of companies have done. You have to make sure that they are cultivated and valued. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. And what I have seen across many different identities, and I was just having this conversation a few weeks ago with one of my mentees who was a student of mine when I was a graduate teaching assistant at Ohio State, and she and I got back in touch with each other after a few years, and it's just so beautiful to see her growth. But this paradox of being hyper visible and completely invisible at the same time in those spaces. So people who are first generation, people who are LGBTQ, people who are people of color can be paradoxically hyper visible to the dominant narrative or the dominant culture in that workplace, but also rendered entirely invisible at the same time.
Yeah, you described my feelings back then.
and it's this constant balance of, am I too much? Am I not enough? Do I say this? Do I not say it? Are they going to think I'm irrational? I'm a bitch. I'm too emotional. I'm not emotional enough. I don't have logic. Like that is the constant narrative that plays in people's heads when they're in these spaces. And not everyone has those voices, which when I heard not everyone thinks like that.
I know. I'm like, what the hell?
Like you don't think through you don't write it down and then, okay, is this going to sound okay? Do I sound put together? No, because people can operate from a position of power and privilege. And so what are companies doing to eliminate this paradox of hyper invisibility and hyper visibility.
Right.
And it's a process, and it is co-created. Again, I would say when people are in spaces and they don't see folks who look like them represented in those same spaces, leadership should not be asking those people to educate them on, oh, what do women do? What do women like? What do fill in the blank identity? Yeah. It is not that person's job to educate the leader of that organization, and I think it starts with that. And it also starts with, what are the biases and assumptions that leadership is walking in with, and how do those things show up in that space? Right. It could be veteran status. It could be age. I remember one place where I worked, and we were hiring. I was overseeing strategic initiatives for the organization, and we had a job open, and we had a veteran who applied, an amazing skill set and resume. And because I was the only one who understood what things meant in military speak, no one wanted to interview this person. And he was such a great match for the job description. And I had to walk through step by step of, okay, this word translates to this word, and this is what he did, and this is how it fits in with our job description. But by that point, no one was interested. Yeah. They had already made up their mind.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Because like so many people don't get jobs because of the resume, because people don't take time and like try to understand. Does that also equate to a cultural problem? Since we're trying to contrast the two, vision and culture.
Yes.
Like how does culture play to a point that like leaders or just the organization get to that point, to a point that they miss the best talent, to a point that they're losing talent, their best people are not staying. And I can give you a little bit of context, because one of the things that I identify within my own company back then, and companies that I've worked with, is like every individual that's in a point of leadership, they'll always bring their own unique culture to the organization's overall culture. That sometimes you see a team, it's like completely different from the other team, even though the company culture said this is who we are. But then the team says completely different. But how does culture play in this scenario where individual leaders are coming with their own unique cultures, and then there's a misalignment between the body of the organization, the leadership, the managers, and the rest of the people?
Yeah, I would say, my first question back is that furthering the organization's values to have that kind of fracturing within the organization? Some companies are fine with that. They're fine with, this team or this group having their own identity. And I think over time, absolutely, your accounting team is going to take on a different identity than your marketing team will. They're just because they're teaming, they're norming together, they're forming a team, and that's to be expected. And I think always asking the questions of how does that measure back to our values? Culture is the air we breathe. It is the mist we walk in.
Could be a bad air. It could be a great air.
That's exactly it. It could be toxic fumes. It could be hazardous waste that we're breathing in that we don't know, but slowly becomes cancerous to us. Or it can be like that oxygen, on the sidelines that the NFL players get in between plays, where you're like, okay, put me back in, coach, I'm ready. Each person is actively contributing to the culture every day, implicitly or explicitly. We are either contributing to or dismantling the culture. And so we have to be accountable. Each person, even if I say, I'm just doing my thing, I'm just here to work. that is dismantling the culture that you want to create.
Yeah, that was the bane of my existence.
Yeah, that is.
Oh, like I'll circle back, Abraham. I was like,
Yeah. So that is absolutely dismantling a culture of community, a culture of safety that you want to create among your team. So I think the first step is for leadership to recognize that culture is not static. It is always evolving every day. Culture shifts and changes. And what is leadership doing to name it, to talk about it, not just from an aspirational perspective,
right,
but to really own their part in it and in the direction that they want it to go.
Right. Just like the greatest philosopher who ever lived, Bruce Lee said, "Be water, my friend."
Right. Be water. And as
water.
a Cancer, I'm a water sign. So I flow and
you're like,
look,
hey.
Water can, over time, water is the most powerful element.
Right.
Because it can create a Grand Canyon. It can carve things, it can shape things,
right,
but it also takes time.
Yes.
And so when we look at culture, and if you have a very toxic workplace, you also have to understand as leaders, it's not going to change overnight.
Right.
So people go through basically the grief process. So, there's anger, there's denial, there's depression, and it's not a straight line. It's kind of, you go down. The culture typically dips and morale lessens.
Yeah.
And that's where it's important to come back in as leaders and say, this is part of the process. It's natural. It's normal for us to feel hopeless in this moment, but it's going to get better.
Wow. And I just share that I actually had a guest on this podcast. He's based in Chicago, Sid Deutsch. And he runs a $3 billion company.
Wow.
And one of the things that he shared was especially on the, frame of culture, he talked about there's so much grief in running businesses. And he said, especially when founders create businesses and then they don't equitize the business. That's his word, equitize.
Yeah.
Meaning they're not distributing equity to the rest of the people that are helping build the company. And then out of nowhere, they sell the company. Now the management team, the people that were building it, just get the news out of the blue. They're like, hey, we just exited $1 billion. Yep. And then but we've been building this for 20 years. We have zero equity into it. And now we're supposed to accept that the completely new group of people are going to come in. That's when you see layoffs, hundreds of thousands of people getting laid off because founders decided to sell a company that people have put blood and sweat and tears over the years. And then they just one day just up and sell because they don't disclose when the acquisition is going.
Right. Yeah.
It's just one day you just realize the company you've put your heart and soul into has been sold. And then grief comes to play. And to his point, he was like, he doesn't invest into companies when he sees founders or leaders that don't equitize their company, which was that's the perfect leader who is starting a company with that mindset, which I didn't have back then because I kind of sold my agency without equitizing people. So now when I bring people in, I try to add them on my cap table just to put my commitment hey, this is how I want to lead. I want to create opportunities, but not just for myself, and equitize that cap table to make sure that the people coming in are getting equity. Do you see that as someone who's an executive who's working with all these companies?
Do I see which part of it?
All of it. I guess we can start with equitizing, the grief aspect. I guess we can start with grief since that was your last point.
Yeah, I think in our society, our identity is very intertwined with the work that we do. When we introduce ourselves, we always start with, what do we do?
Right.
I'm Katie. I work in people and culture. And until we flip that script and talk about what we value, I'm Katie, and I value authenticity, compassion, and integrity, which would be a very weird way at a networking event to introduce myself. But our identity is so intertwined with the work that we do that when that identity is shaken or removed or threatened in any way, it's not just the work.
Right.
It's who we are, how have we defined ourselves in certain spaces. And there are a lot of people who can't define themselves separate from the work because
Right.
they have built something, because they have taken it from zero to, hey, I support X number of families
Right.
as a result of what I've built. And so I would absolutely say there's a lot of grief that goes into that from that perspective. I would also say ego and pride show up there too. And in ways that, if leaders are doing the work, like you said, knowing yourself,
Right.
you can understand more about, okay, this is where I get very prideful, or this is where my ego maybe blinds me to seeing the true need and the nature of this organization, which is to equitize, or which
Right.
is to really give people buy-in in a different way.
Right. I like that.
Yeah.
We're getting to the end of this conversation, but then I have so many questions just based off of the grief. But I think I want to just keep that until next time.
Yep.
But now we're coming to the end of this, and you've done such a great job just giving me free consultation.
Yeah, I'm here for it.
And I want to know what exactly is
Iconoclast Advisors.
Iconoclast.
Yeah.
Wait, say that again.
Iconoclast Advisors.
Iconoclast Advisors.
Yes.
That's your new venture.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, my business partner and I, we started seeing patterns in organizations, conversations that we were having just at networking events of people who were treating the world of money and the world of people as two separate universes. Why are people leaving? Why are we hemorrhaging good talent? And also, why are my numbers down? Or, hey, our managers are treating our employees like crap, and why are our numbers down? Like they were never really able to put together how those things are inextricably linked with one another. That if we have thriving cultures, if we have deep, meaningful engagement with our people and our managers, naturally what follows is innovation. And what follows from innovation and safety in the workplace is higher bottom line, higher results in whether you're selling something or creating something, whatever that looks like.
Right.
And so in these conversations, what we noticed is also that people look at quote unquote HR as mostly compliance. It's the principal's office. I look at people and culture as the basis for everything we do in the workplace. We don't have work if we don't have people.
Yes.
And many companies want people to show up not just as workers now. They want them to be engaged, like you were talking about with your people who were like, oh, I just want to work.
Yeah, I just need to do
I
work,
want a community here. And so Ryan, my business partner, and I created Iconoclast Advisors to help companies rethink their strategy around how they approach their work and how they approach managers, how they approach people and culture, and how they approach finances in the workplace. So iconoclast is a word that means critics or rebels who challenge the status quo. And it comes from the Greek word that means image breaker. And so my business partner, he is a CPA. He's a former chief financial officer.
I had a feeling that's what he is, because I went to school for finance too.
He also used to be a guitarist in a punk band, and is a trained artist. Yes, is a trained artist. And I am currently in the world of people and culture, but my background is living in multiple countries, global traveler. Multiple languages, researcher by training, so not your traditional quote-unquote HR person. And so we look at ourselves as kind of the anti-consultant.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. Well, I'm very excited because everything that you just talked about, it validated what Heliona, the company behind this podcast, is all about.
Yeah.
Finance and people. Like
That's right.
Why there is
handshake.
always a lot of people don't understand, just simply because your top performer is doing so well, his behavior is impacting your bottom line.
That's right.
He's bringing you cash, but he's also hemorrhaging it by making sure like your retention sucks. You can't retain people because your top performer is doing well,
right?
But his behavior is impacting the entire bottom line.
Right.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I just one more thing on that. I would say to any company that no damage is as great as keeping a high performer who was toxic in your organization, because that tells the rest of your organization what you really value, which is money over your people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm going to put you in a spot. What's something that you believed 5 years ago that you don't believe now after all of these experiences that you've accumulated?
Gosh. I'm thinking about where I was 5 years ago, and my mind went to pandemic. I mean, So 5 years ago, I'll just tell you, I was living in New Hampshire. I was in a space of great uncertainty. I was working in higher education. And some of the things that I believed then were that integrity didn't matter, that values weren't the thing that actually drove business forward, because I was in a state of confusion. My students had gone home for spring break. They never came back. There was a mental health crisis happening with my students, and I would probably say a lot of college students, a lot of students across the country. So I was spending a lot of time just checking in virtually on people. Are you okay? Do you have someone to talk to? What's going on for you? And what I know now is that when we hold true to our values, that's when things open up to us and possibilities become actualities.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, as a consultant,
yes.
What is something that you would like to leave with people that are listening to this? Something that they can apply to their company in order to improve the workplace experience or make their space healthier. Yeah, that's, and this could be just one thing. It could be 10 things. It's up to you.
Yeah. I would say start with yourself and look at what are you bringing to the workplace? Right. What are you contributing that maybe you feel like isn't being seen or heard or valued? Right. And what are you contributing that maybe you want to do a little bit differently? Maybe it's your attitude. Maybe it's you feel like you're not being seen or heard or valued. And so you step into work with a certain perspective or a certain feeling. Start there and then begin to think about how your why, your individual values and the things that drive you connect to your organization's why. Right. And if you don't see that alignment, really start investigating and digging for that and try to find that answer.
I love that. And to conclude this entire conversation, after everything that we've talked about, which we've talked about a lot here today. Yeah, we have.
We've gone to a lot of places.
I want to know, how is your spirit right now?
My spirit is peaceful and hopeful and bright.
Wow. Well,
thank you.
Thank you so much for this amazing conversation, and hopefully we can have more in the future. But again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.